Okay, can you tell us about the history of the barracks?
I wouldn't know a lot about the history of the barracks because it was always there. It was there for hundreds of years. And I mean, I passed it up and down, but I never took much notice of it. See, in those days, none of us ever took much notice of history or things like that. Whereas now, I'm sorry I didn't ask my father or mother more about it, but it was always there. But that was only one barracks, that was the main barracks. In the middle of Barrack Street, there was also a second barracks up at the top on the left. What's now the houses that are the terrace of houses there, going right around the St. Carthage Avenue. Now, when I was a young fella, the wall was still around that. It was a big area. We used to go in and play inside. It was a derelict area. It was a big area the whole way into Carthage Avenue, right around Blake's Lane, you know. So we used to play in there. And then early after the war, they knocked it down and they built all those houses. But that was the cavalry barracks, I think. So there was actually two barracks here in Waterford. And you see, just a slight diversion. People often wonder why Waterford weren't more active in 1798 and in 1916. There was always a big presence of army here, for a start, plus police. With two barracks, there was an awful lot of people around. So you'd be thinking twice before you run around with guns. And whereas there were plenty of places up the country, but there wasn't a policeman or an army man to be seen, and they did nothing. But it was very difficult in Waterford because the place was crawling with army.
And how was the presence of the barracks? Did that have an influence on the community?
It would have in the immediate area because whatever troops there were, the pubs indeed would do well out of it. I'm sure the small shops as well. And there was some accommodation there for married quarters, not an awful lot. So obviously some of the money would have been spent in the area. And you see, in those days, Norris was above the edge of the city. There was nothing beyond it. So, and the likes of Ardent Grain didn't exist in those places up to just before the war. So you were on the edge of the city, and people probably shop locally in the local shops, apart from going downtown. That was it.
And who occupied the barracks then?
And the British Army until 1922.
Right. And did any of the members of the barracks ever come to the pub, or did you ever see them?
They didn't come up to us for some reason. They seemed to stay around, or it was straight across the road with Fat Brown's afterwards. That's the one.
And what was it like to own a pub in Waterford at this time?
Well, we had a bar and grocery up there. I had been there when I went into it, I had been there already about 60 years. So it was basically, you had your grocery during the day and very little bar business. Then the grocery closed and you did the bar at night time. And it was pretty well a local trade. We were the last pub on the way out of town, so there used to be a certain number of farmers would call in for one for the road on the way out. Right. And also we were lucky enough to be near the Gaelic field, so we did well out of the Gaelic field.
And were there any really memorable characters?
Actually there were, I suppose, memorable in a small way in the area, but there was one fellow somewhere I reminded me of lately, Martin Hunt. He was a harmless poor fellow. He was a little bit soft on top and he didn't work and just hung around always. And he got involved. At the time, Waterford had a very strong hurling team, 1948, and those times he got a hold of Waterford Hurley. He used to be always going on with his hurley and a Waterford top on him and a cap. And he'd be down letting on he was on goal downtown. A favourite place of his was with his back to the clock tower facing up Baron Stanley, and he'd be letting on he was on goal. He can say it all over the place. Which is harmless, but it's a bit of fun.
And can you tell us about the two executions in the barracks?
Well, they had to do with the Troubles in 1960, or not 1960, 1922, 23. There were two members of the old IRA who were captured in, I forget the details around here, and they were tried and executed, and two local lads. There was a lot of people killed around County Waterford. I mean, people say nothing happened in Waterford during the Troubles. There was a lot of things happening in Waterford. A lot of people got killed.
Can you remember any of the details about anyone else being killed around that time?
No, but I mean, that's long before I was born, you know, that's 1922, 23.
Oh, right.
And as I said, I often regret my father was involved in all that. but he would never talk about it. He didn't want to talk about it on a very odd occasion. The only time he'd get talking about it was there was an uncle of mine who had been in the army at the same time and who had seen service down here. If they got together maybe once a year, they'd be talking about our pals and all the rest of it. You might hear something then. But they didn't, in the ordinary course of events, he wouldn't tell anything about the fighting that went on or whether he was involved. I could never get an answer to the question as to whether he was actually in a battle and actually shot anybody or not. He would never speak about it. Just one of those things that they wanted to cut out of their minds. It happened and that was it.
And you were saying something happened in 1960 as well. Was there?
Well, I mean, from 16 leading on to 22, 23, it was all part of the one trouble. You know?
Oh, right, okay. Okay, thank you.
Is that all the questions?
Yeah.
Don't stop there. Was there anything else that you could add?
A few more characters, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's what that is.
There was one fellow who used to come in, and I mean, he wouldn't be a character in the ordinary way, but he was a character in the pub. I won't mention his name. We call him Michael. But he worked for British Rail down there on the docks. He was a kind of a supervisor. And he was a small, blocky little man, but he had a hell of an important feeling about himself. You know, he was supervisor. He was giving orders to the poor dockers down there. But he used to come into the pub every evening, and he was a pompous little man. He'd march in and take over the place. But he had a great saying about, what do you have? And if there's any country of us or anybody didn't know it, kind of to be expecting to say, oh, this fella's going to buy a drink, you know. But he'd come and say, what do you have? Then he'd pause. He'd say, we have rain. Then he'd sit down. He was one character. There was another fellow now. There's quite a few he used to come into us who were survivors in the First War. I'd been in the British Army in the First War. And if you could get them talking, you get great stories out of them. Whether they were true or not, I don't know. But one fellow I always remember, I call him Norris. Tuesday was a great day, and they all got their pensions on a Tuesday. And all those British Army fellas would be hanging on from week to week. But Tuesday morning, they'd get their money, they'd be into the pub, and they would go home until they'd nothing left. They'd stay there all day, you know. But this particular Tuesday, I'll call this fellow Morris. He was a gas man. He had been in the pub anyhow, and in those days, the front of the pub was the right-hand side of it, and 3 small houses, single-story houses, just beside it, you see. So he came out of the pub and he sat on the windowsill on one of them there, sunning himself. And the next thing he falls down, and a couple of the locals gather around him, and he gathered around him. And somebody said, go and get him a drink. So somebody went into the house next door and brought him out a glass of water and gave it to him. Christ, he said, I'm poisoned. And somebody said he hadn't tasted water since the First World War. He was another fellow. He had been all over India. He had walked in the British Army over most of India. And there was another one of those fellows too. He used to come in again on a Tuesday. He'd thank himself in the middle of the counter. And any farmers came in from around the area, any young farmers, he'd always make his way over to him and he'd get talking to him, you see. And the next thing, I knew your father well. And of course he gets stuck into him, and he get a couple of drinks out of him in the next couple of hours. But it was great to see it happening. The skill those fellas had at getting a few free drinks, you know. At the time it was a nuisance, but it was a bit harmless. But I knew your father well, no matter who came in. Anybody else? They were all harmless characters.
Yeah. Your family themselves, they always in the pub business?
My grandfather bought that place in 1893. And the funny thing about it, he had served his time, Mikey Norris. His family were all farmers up at the top of the Yellow Road, and they sold milk. He was the youngest of the big family. They all sold milk, so they were very well known around the area. And in fact, I remember when he was a man in his 80s, and he could start at the top of the Yellow Road, the upper Yellow Road, go down one side, the Yellow Road, go the whole way around Ballybrick, and then go back up to the top of the Yellow Road and tell you who lived in every house. They sold milk, you see, so they were always up and down, round and about it. This was the way things were in those days, you know. But when he served his time in the evenings, and then he went to go by the pub, but they wouldn't give him a licence because he wasn't 21. You had to be 21 to have a licence. So luckily, the sergeant in the area knew him through going into the pub down below, so he organised it, he got the licence, and then he moved up there and started off. So he kept going until about 1940. He retired, and my mother, who was his daughter, went in there then. And strangely then, his wife died a few years later, so she had to go to Truro to mind him. So I moved in there, and I took over about 1950. And we carried on until over 95 years there, but I wasn't going to hang on another 5 years just to get 100 years up on the wall. I wasn't worth all that hassle. But we had great times. There's another, no, it's slightly different again. We used to have a football match every year up there between the Marrymen and the Single. Just a bit of fun up in the sports field. We used to make a big deal of it. The Barrack Street Band would come up or something, and they'd play us around the pitch, and we'd imagine over around Crow Park, and we all felt great. It's only a bit of fun. But at that time, there was a chap came in just beforehand to the pub, and he had a bad name locally. He was being a troublemaker. I didn't know him from Adam. But anyway, it turned out that he was on the team, the single man team, that particular Saturday night. Played our match above, and they won. And I didn't know it, but they had made him captain of the men's team tonight, and we presented him with this little cup. Well, if he got the All-Ireland, he wouldn't have been more excited. He was crying, he was delirious. He was the happiest day of his life. He didn't want it to end. So they all came back down to the bar for a few drinks afterwards that night, and about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, I noticed a bit of commotion. It was your man's father had come in, and he was dragging him out. Seemingly, they were going to England that night to work. And the father came in, and the son didn't want to go. He didn't want to leave the lads, and he went out of the bar above crying like a child. This tough guy. For the first time in his life, somebody had accepted him, and he felt great. And he went off to England. And every single Christmas that he was over in England for the next 25 years, every single Christmas Eve he rang up the bar to say hello to the lads. There was a fella never got a bad name. Maybe over a couple of rows as a kid, went off, and he was anything but a bad for him to finish. He's back here now, and it just goes to show, you know. I always think of him as an example. He had a very bad name now. But he probably never got a chance before, but the lads accepted him above and went on from there. I often think of the match up the field. But
do you think the experience in owning a bar like in, say, the 60s and 70s would be different to owning a bar now?
Things had improved a bit by then, you see. There was a bit of work around them. The glass had started, and it was a different game then. You could, I expanded the bar about 1960. In the old days, the bar and the grocery were together in the front, so I built a whole new bar in the store at the back, and we moved the bar into the back and left the grocery in the front. That was the first big step. But by that stage, you see, all the houses were out in Roanmore Park. See, in those days, there was only a few houses in Roanmore Park, and not even in Roanmore Park, out in Roanmore, out as far as Spurno Place. That's all the houses that you had, the main road out there. Then they built them in what was Sullivan's Field. That's Roanmore Park now. Then they started building further out. So in due course, we weren't on the outskirts of the city, we were inside the city. And then, of course, unfortunately, a few more pubs got built out there. So, of course, Waterford Glass was built then, not the new factory, but the old factory, but they had their sports centre out there, and eventually they got a bar as well. So the scene changed a bit. And all the houses in Griffith Place, Marion Park and all that. I remember all that place being fields. I mean, I'm not 100 years old. I remember playing football at what would be the junction of Ardney Green and Slieve Keel now. On the right hand side, there wasn't a house in there. You had the small houses going up on the right hand side, and the rest of it was a field. I remember playing football in there as a kid. So, I mean, there'd be a lot of changes up there.
Mm. Do you remember many of the old shops on Barrack Street?
Yeah, I would have, yeah. There was a lot of small shops around, a lot of pubs around. I think there was more pubs in Barrack Street than any pub in any street in Waterford. There was a famous chemist down at the end, down from here now, down on the last block on this side, Daddy Curtis. He was an old-fashioned, kind of a quack cum chemist. He was a chemist, I shouldn't say a quack, but he was a great man for natural remedies and that kind of stuff. And I don't know how he got the name Daddy Curtis, but he had a great business there for years and years.
This guy used to go to fields picking herbs.
Yeah, I presume, yeah. Again, I wouldn't have known anything about him at the time, because kids don't take any notice of things like that, you know. It's when they get a bit older, they start wondering why these things happened. There were shops, a lot of shops in Barrack Street, and they all did their little bit. And they were all small shops, you know. The money involved would be peanuts compared to now, but you had to make a living somewhere, so you just made it. And it was an awful loss when the British Army moved out of the barracks, of course, because the Irish Army only ever had a very small garrison down there. And they wouldn't make up for all the business that was lost by these soldiers. So drank all their money and spent all their money down there.
And what ways did people make their money? What was...
Well, in those days, little shops, or you could get very little work around. That's why most people just had to go to England when they were young. There was nothing else for them. You joined the army. That's why an awful lot of people in Waterford, in Ireland, joined the British Army during the years. There was nothing else. It was a living. I hate to think of it as a living, but it was the way. That's worse. As long as peace lasted, it was a handy living. You got your money for marching around the barracks. But when the wars came along, I mean, only last week there was a programme on the telly about Gallipoli, and I was amazed to discover that during the First World War, from the north of Ireland, there were more Catholics in the British Army than there were Protestants. Now, that's worth thinking about, because look at all the noise they make up there about their loyalty to the Queen. We're British and we're that. There was more Catholics up there, and the only VC won in the last war was won by a Catholic from the Fords Road. It's a queer one. They should be telling Paisley that up there when he's shouting about his Britishness. That. Don't draw me out in Paisley anywhere, huh? You'll have to censor the whole thing.
Are the gates in the barracks now, or are they the original gates, or have they been replaced?
As long as I remember, I don't remember them being changed much down there.
So the big gates, are they still the original gates?
Well, they said they're there a long time anyway. As long as I'm passing down, I didn't notice them being changed. The only other big point worth remembering is that in those days the sports field above was used largely by the British Army. This would have been in the early years of the century. It was the playing field for soccer matches, more than hurling matches and all that, and they used to march up and down regularly in there, play their matches. It was a very busy spot. That was before ever. That would have been before the First World War. But it was regularly used for soccer before ever it was used for hurling. And in fact, let's skip that.
Go on.
Dangerous. At one stage, it was won by my grandfather, it was him, Ricky Norris. He brought that field up there because it was in danger of falling into the wrong hands of the soccer people.
Could you tell us a bit about the hurling community here? It's always a big thing.
Well, it was very strong, yeah. It was. Erin's Own were the team in those days, in the 30s. Erin's Own were at least as big as Mount Sinai are now in the 30s. They were county champions year in, year out. The Ware family, who were not a Waterford family, they're printers, they came to Waterford. They were the makings of hurling in Waterford, because they had Charlie Ware, Jim Ware, Mort Ware. I'm forgetting somebody else. There was another brother, I forget now. They had good hurlers around, but they hadn't, the Wares added greatly to it. And they were good and strong in the 30s. They got to an All-Ireland in 1938 or 39, beaten by a pint by Dublin. And that was great because Waterford had never got that far before. I mean, they're always good, but like the present day, they were good, but they're short a few players always. They never had enough. But they had great individual hurlers, the likes of Charlie Ware, John Keane, Jim Ware. And from then on, as you probably know most of the history from then on, 48 was the first All-Ireland we won two that day, the senior and the minor. Which I was at. Not too many were at all Waterford's victories. I was at the 63 one when they won it. They should have won. 57. They were beaten. When did we win? We won in 48 and we won in 59, wasn't it? Yeah. 57. I'd say they were caught it. In 1963, they were kind of caught it again. We didn't win them anyway. There's no point saying we were caught it. We didn't win them.
Are there any stories that your parents or grandparents would have told you about life around here at Barrack Street?
Not really. You see, in those days, if whatever, you didn't ask questions about things like that. If you were told something, you were told, but you didn't question your parents. I always regretted I didn't ask my father more, but at the time, you didn't do that. You did what you were told, and all the rest of it, you know. And as I grew older, I hadn't any great interest in it. It was only in later years when my father was gone or nearly gone that I began to get interested in local history. And I'm always sorry I didn't ask more questions.
Did the British always own the barracks, or did they take it over from the Irish?
Well, they would have taken it back over, I suppose, back to the 1600s. It was always, further back, there was always a big garrison here in Waterford. Waterford was always a very Protestant city, you see.
So it wasn't built before the British took over Ireland?
Well, when did they take over Ireland?
During the plantations?
Yeah, well, that's back in the
So the
1600s.
plantations took it?
But I wouldn't like to pin down the time, but I mean, there's the British Army barracks here since then.
It's
Anyway.
always known as
There always
the
was a
British
big
Army.
British presence here, yeah. It was one of the bigger barracks around the country. And on top of that, all the rich people and all the top businessmen were all Protestants. If they weren't Protestants, they were Quakers. The Quakers came in later on. But even in the early 1900s, at least half the corporation were all Protestants. Doctors, landowners, whatnot. They ran the whole show. They mightn't have had the numbers, but they had the power. And that's one of the reasons why Waterford always got the name of being a very British city. It wouldn't have been in numbers, because probably there was more Irish than the Protestants than the others here, but they were on top. They had all to say. So, being good businessmen, acute businessmen, they kept in with the British establishment, the British merchants. There was great business always done between Waterford and Bristol. Huge trade between Waterford and Bristol. Waterford port was far bigger in those days than it is now. It was the second biggest port in Ireland. And at one stage, more than 50% of all the wine imported into Ireland came through Waterford. So the Waterford port 100 years ago was far bigger than it is now. I don't mean in size, but in the volume of business it was doing, comparatively, it was far bigger than it is now. I mean, the tall ships down there was what Waterford would have looked like 150 years ago. There were often 200 ships on the river at one time. I know they were all small, or even 100. I know they're all small, but there's a lot of ships that have done the key there. We've gone away a bit from Norris, haven't we? Barrister. Anyway, I mean, cut out whatever you don't want. If you get me going, I might never stop.
What was Mount Sinai like back in those days?
The same as it is now. It's changed very little.
Yeah.
The only thing that's changed, they hadn't the church on the front there. And the schools at the back, but the second building wasn't there then. The big oldish building at the back was the first one built. But as regards this end of it, it was exactly the same. The church wasn't there, but apart from that, it would have been the same inside. I didn't go to Mount Sinai, so I wouldn't know any details there. I was brought up on the quay in what's left of the bus office now. So I went to school actually in St. Declan's. So that was one problem over here when I moved up here then. Although I was living over the bar, I didn't really know anybody in the streets. I didn't go to school with any of the lads here. I don't really know that many people locally until I got into the bar business. Because I just happened to live on the quay, you see, and had my own school pals down there.
And what, the bands always kind of had a big part
Barrack
in the
Street
community.
band. Yeah, well, there's always bands in Waterford, and the carnival, you see, had a lot to do with that. The carnival started just before the war. It was, the first couple were held on the courthouse grounds. They were very exciting in September, because it was dark every night, and you were allowed up, down there, and all the rest of it. They had all these amusements, and I remember a fellow diving off a tower into a little basin full of water. A little, mainly bigger than a bat. He used to drive off a pillar 100 feet high into this thing. They had things like that down there, you know. It's very exciting. And then it was moved up to the barracks for years and years. It used to be held there for years and years. And there'd be great concerts there every night. Waterford always had fabulous bands and fabulous musicians and singers. And it's no wonder that Brendan Byron and the lads did so well. Because all down the years there was lots of bands in it. one thing that seems strange now, in up to about, I say nearly 1960, every Sunday when the Waterford soccer team would play in Kilcoan, Barrack Street Band used to march out from here, out to Kilcoan, play before the match, and play after, and march back again. And it was fabulous. You'd walk out there then you wouldn't feel it at all. Everybody used to follow them down the road and off out. And apart from the music out there, it was a very easy way of walking out behind the band. You wouldn't feel yourself doing it. That was a tradition for years and years. But I mean, there are lots of other bands. There's Thomas Francis Meagher, there's the Yellow Road Band, there's the pipe, there's an old pipe band, the Phelan Pipers Band. There were several bands always in the city. Time I stopped, is there?
Let's see if any more questions, no?
I haven't told you an awful lot about the area, but that's because I don't know that much about the area.
Yeah.
I mean, I could tell you stories about what happened in Norris's pub for years, but that's not what you wanted. I mean, that kind of stuff, nobody's interested in that.
If you want to tell us one quick story,
Yeah,
go for it.
it's so quick. So we're given a couple of names of characters.
Well, I didn't want to mention, the one good story was about your man going to England. That was a great story. Let me think now. There was one fella, yeah, I better not mention his name either. We were very near the sports field, so we used to do well out of the county final, the big matches. Oh yeah, I'll tell you two stories. But there was one country team used to come in, and the boss man on the team had a pub out there. And I better not mention any names, but he was a great supporter of the club. But when they came in, he used to come in and he'd buy a drink for all the fellas, and he'd make more noise. But eventually, they won the county championship this year anyway, and he arrived in after the match. And what did they have with the money? A hunting horn. You know, this one. And he proceeded to play this for about an hour and a half after the match, you know, just to rile all the Mount Seinfeld. And I need to tell you, the Mount Seinfelds were not there at the time. We had to listen to this fella for about an hour and a half. I'll never forget it. The only good thing about it was when he came in, and this is a long time ago, after the match, he put £100 on the counter and he says, "Tell me when that's gone." And you didn't get many of those back in the 50s or 60s. But he used to make some noise with his hunting horn. You get a few whiskies in him, and anything could happen. Now, Slover was the nicest man you could meet, but there was something else crossed my mind there.
With the hurling or something?
It had something to do with one of the teams now. It wasn't that day. That was... something else crossed my mind then, and it's just gone. One other little story, not to do with it, or it has in a way. Probably your parents, if you ask them about it, ask them, did they ever hear the Norris Minor? Did you ever hear that?
No.
Well, I used to have music upstairs over the front, and I gave it up at a certain stage. It was a waste of time. So my daughter decided she wanted to open and run it as a bar. At the time, Jeff's had just opened on the aftermarket. So she set up the bar upstairs and opened, and it was called the Norris Minor. Ollie will tell you all about it. That's where Ollie first got involved in youth drama and all that kind of stuff. But she started bringing in groups from out of town up there. So she got up a bit like Jeff's, that kind of a setup, you know, just catering for those people. But she brought in groups from all over town up there. And she had some great groups from up the country, and she ran it for a few years until she met somebody in one of the groups and fell in love and took off. So that was more or less the end of the Norris Minor. But Jim Nolan's first play was performed up there before ever it got near a theatre. And I think the second one too. Or the second one about something about Miss Kent wasn't Miss Kent on the Coliseum. Her name came into it. His first 2 plays were performed up there in Norris Minor anyway. Apart from the fact that a lot of musicians passed through the hands up there. Some of them became quite famous. There was fellas down in Wexford with a very big group a few years ago. They started up in the Norris Minor. I'll leave Pritchard wise on all that now. That's where he first got involved with youth drama and all that kind of stuff. Jim Nolan was up there regularly. That's about all we did. Famous, I think.
That's grand.
That's right.